The call from the past. I was brushing my teeth when my phone vibrated on the bathroom sink. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, one of those long sequences that make you hesitate before answering. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something about it gnawed at me, an unspoken whisper at the back of my mind. I spat out the toothpaste, wiped my mouth, and pressed the green button. The voice on the other end was mine. Older, raspier, frayed at the edges like a recording played one too many times. "Listen to me," it croaked, thick with urgency. "Do not go outside tonight. No matter what happens. No matter what you hear. Stay inside." I felt a sharp chill creep down my spine, an icy grip tightening around my stomach. "Who is this?" I demanded, but I already knew the answer. It was impossible. It was absurd. And yet, the voice, my voice, exhaled like it had run a marathon. "You won't believe me. I know that. But I have to try. If you step outside, you will see him." And if you see him, the voice cracked, a wet cough swallowing the last words. "Please. Just stay inside." I clenched my jaw, shaking my head as if that would rattle my brain into reason. This is a joke, right? Some sick prank? Silence. Not the static-filled kind, but the deep, cavernous void of nothingness. Then, a final whisper. "You have been warned." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, waiting for something, anything, that would make this make sense. But no second call came. The seconds stretched long and sticky, the kind that drag you into a dark, endless well of paranoia. I was still gripping my phone when the bathroom light flickered once, twice, then held steady. My apartment was old, and the wiring had its quirks, but right now, it felt like a bad omen. I let out a slow breath and forced a laugh, trying to shake off the tension coiled in my muscles. This was ridiculous. Someone was messing with me. Maybe Mike. He had a twisted sense of humor and just enough tech knowledge to pull something like this off. I made a mental note to cuss him out the next time I saw him. Still, I felt uneasy. I turned on every light in the apartment, locking and double-checking the windows, though I lived on the 4th floor. It wasn't fear, not yet, just a lingering unease, like when you wake up from a nightmare and can't quite shake the feeling that something followed you back. Midnight crept up faster than I expected. I should have gone to bed, should have listened to whatever fever dream version of myself had called with that eerie warning. But the more I thought about it, the more I refused to let some ghostly prank dictate my night. I grabbed my jacket, stuffed my phone into my pocket, and left the apartment. The hallway was eerily silent, as if the whole building had gone to sleep at the exact same moment. The air felt heavier, thick with something unspoken. The fluorescent light above the elevator buzzed faintly, casting a sickly yellow glow on the peeling wallpaper. I took the stairs, my footsteps echoing too loudly. Outside, the street was deserted. No cars. No late-night joggers. Just an expanse of pavement stretching under flickering streetlights. A few blocks down, I spotted a lone figure standing at the far end of the sidewalk. A man in a dark coat. He wasn't moving. Just standing there, facing me. The unease in my stomach twisted into something sharper. My brain fumbled for logic, maybe a neighbor, maybe some drunk taking a break on his way home. But there was something off. The way the streetlights cast shadows around him, too many, like they didn't know where to land. The way the air around him seemed thicker. I took a step back. His head tilted slightly, just enough to let me know he saw me. And then he moved. Not walked. Moved. One moment he was at the far end of the street, the next he was closer. No sound. No footsteps. Just an impossible shift, like a frame cut from reality and pasted somewhere else. My breath caught in my throat, a pulse of raw, unfiltered fear surging through me. I turned and ran. I bolted down the sidewalk, my breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps as the cold night air burned my throat. My mind screamed for an explanation, some rational thread to cling to, but there was none, just the image of that figure shifting, closing the distance without a single step, as if the space between us was bending in his favor. The streets were unsettlingly empty, devoid of life, as if the entire city had taken a collective breath and held it just for this moment. I sprinted past darkened storefronts and parked cars, my shoes slapping against the pavement, the sound echoing in the dead silence, making me feel like the only living thing left in this entire stretch of existence. I didn't dare glance back, didn't want to see how close he was, but the sickly sensation of something behind me was growing thicker, pressing against my skin like damp, suffocating fabric. I turned a corner sharply, nearly slipping on the slick concrete, my body twisting awkwardly as I fought to regain balance, but I didn't stop moving. My apartment was too far, and the thought of running all the way back up those stairs, fumbling with my keys, and trying to slam the door shut before he reached me felt laughable. Instead, I focused on finding somewhere else, anywhere, to hide until I could breathe, until I could force my brain to make sense of what was happening. The alley to my left gaped open like a wound between the buildings, dark and narrow, barely illuminated by the flickering neon sign of a nearby bar. It wasn't an ideal choice, but at this point, I wasn't in a position to be picky. I veered into it without hesitation, ducking behind a row of dumpsters, pressing my back against the cold brick wall, willing myself to shrink into the shadows. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, loud and frantic, drowning out everything else. I clenched my teeth, forcing slow, controlled breaths through my nose, trying to steady the tremor in my limbs. The street remained silent, no footsteps, no rustling of fabric, no telltale sounds of pursuit. Maybe I had outrun him. Maybe he wasn't even real. My mind was already grasping for an explanation, some bizarre hallucination, an anxiety-fueled nightmare, a sleep-deprived trick of the eye. But deep down, I knew better. I knew that what I had seen wasn't just my imagination playing tricks on me. Something shifted in the alley. Not a sound. Not a movement. Just a change in the air itself, a wrongness that slithered through the darkness, brushing against the edges of my awareness like icy fingers trailing along the nape of my neck. It felt as if the alley had stretched a little farther, as if the walls had closed in just an inch, as if the darkness had thickened into something with weight, something that was watching, waiting. A soft scrape, barely audible, sent a jolt of cold terror down my spine. It was close. Too close. My fingers curled into fists, nails digging into my palms as my breath hitched, but I didn't move. I couldn't. I just sat there, pressed against the brick, feeling the weight of something unseen standing just beyond my line of sight. It wasn't like being stalked by a human. There was no sound of breathing, no impatient shifting of weight, no signs of life. There was only the deep, consuming awareness that I was not alone. I reached for my phone with trembling hands, trying to keep my movements slow, deliberate, careful not to make a sound. My fingers fumbled against the screen, but just as I managed to unlock it, the screen flickered, then went black. The battery had been at 60% when I left my apartment. Now, it was dead. A whisper brushed against my ear, soft as a breath, but I couldn't make out the words. My body went rigid, every muscle locking up as a cold shiver crawled down my spine. I didn't turn my head. I didn't need to. I knew that if I looked, if I acknowledged whatever was standing beside me, it would become real in a way I couldn't take back. Slowly, carefully, I forced myself to move, inching along the wall, keeping my eyes fixed straight ahead. My chest was tight, lungs barely expanding, as if my own body was trying to make itself smaller, to take up less space, to become invisible. The alley stretched before me, the exit seeming impossibly far, but I had no other choice. I kept moving, one careful step at a time, feeling the weight of that unseen presence following, its silence more deafening than any sound could have been. I didn't run. Running felt wrong, felt like an invitation, a challenge. I walked, slow and steady, my pulse hammering so hard I was afraid it would shake my whole body apart. The moment my feet hit the sidewalk, I forced myself to keep walking, resisting the urge to break into a sprint. The bar was just across the street, its neon sign buzzing weakly, the dull hum of a jukebox leaking through the cracked door. The normalcy of it, the contrast between that dimly lit space and the nightmare unraveling behind me, was almost unbearable. The second I stepped inside, the air changed. It was like breaking through the surface of water after being trapped beneath it. The sound of muffled conversation, the clatter of glasses, the warmth of stale beer and sweat and cigarette smoke, it hit me all at once, grounding me in the familiar, in the human. I stumbled toward the nearest booth, dropping into the seat, my hands still shaking as I fought to steady my breath. For a few minutes, I just sat there, my back pressed against the peeling vinyl, eyes fixed on the scratched surface of the table, listening to the reassuring hum of a world that still made sense. Eventually, I convinced myself to glance toward the window. The alley was empty. The street was empty. The figure was gone. My body sagged with exhaustion, the adrenaline crash hitting hard. Maybe I had imagined it after all. Maybe it had just been the power of suggestion, a mind primed for fear after that goddamn phone call. I let out a breath, long and unsteady, rubbing my hands over my face, willing myself to shake it off. And then my phone rang. The screen was still black, still lifeless, but the sound was unmistakable, the shrill, insistent vibration rattling against the tabletop like a death rattle. My stomach clenched as I reached for it, dread curling in my gut like something rotten, but I already knew what I would see before I even looked. A number I didn't recognize. I hesitated for only a second before answering, pressing the cold glass to my ear, my breath shallow, my fingers digging into the plastic casing like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. There was silence on the other end, deep and cavernous, stretching too long, thick enough to drown in. And then, finally, the voice came, familiar and wrong all at once, a rasping whisper that sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. "You shouldn't have gone outside." The line clicked dead. I sat frozen, the dead air of the call still humming in my ear, as if the silence itself had weight, pressing against my skull. My hand clenched around the phone, fingers aching from the force of my grip, but I couldn't bring myself to put it down. The neon sign outside flickered, casting erratic pulses of red and blue across the scratched tabletop, making shadows jump and shift like restless phantoms. The conversations in the bar droned on, a distant hum that barely registered against the pounding in my head. Someone laughed, the sound sharp and cutting, yanking me back into the moment, but it did nothing to ease the dread coiled in my chest. I turned the phone over in my hands, pressing the power button again and again, but the screen remained black, lifeless, as if the call had never happened. The bartender gave me a sideways glance, his expression unreadable, and for a second, I debated telling him, saying something just to anchor myself to another human being, but what could I even say? That I was being chased by something that didn't move the way it should? That my phone was ringing despite being completely drained? That the voice on the other end seemed to know me, to know exactly where I was, what I had done, what I shouldn't have done. The words felt useless, ridiculous, something to be dismissed with a shrug and a muttered, "You need to get some sleep, buddy." I needed to get home. As much as the bar felt like a temporary refuge, a bright, human place untouched by whatever was outside, I couldn't stay here all night. And if I sat any longer, I knew I'd start convincing myself that none of this had really happened, that the fear was just exhaustion twisting my thoughts into something ugly and irrational. I peeled myself off the booth's sticky vinyl, legs stiff and unsteady as I made my way toward the door, forcing myself to breathe, to focus on the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. The street outside was empty. The alley was just a black void in the corner of my vision, but I refused to look at it. I kept my gaze forward, walking with purpose, ignoring the crawling sensation at the back of my neck that told me something was still watching. I turned down my block, my building looming ahead, a familiar shape against the darkened sky. The windows were mostly dark, save for the faint glow of a television on the third floor, the shifting colors flickering against the cracked pane of the fire escape. It should have been comforting, home, safe, normal, but the feeling didn't come. My hand shook as I jammed the key into the lock, twisting it hard enough that I half expected it to snap. The door groaned open, the dim, stale-lit hallway stretching before me, the air thick with the scent of dust and old carpeting. I stepped inside and locked it behind me, twisting the deadbolt twice, then securing the chain for good measure. My heart was still hammering, but at least here, in the familiar cocoon of my apartment, I could pretend I was safe. The living room was just as I had left it, blankets draped over the couch, an empty coffee cup sitting beside my laptop, a pile of unread mail scattered across the table. Nothing was out of place. Nothing had changed. I exhaled slowly, pressing my palms against the back of the couch, forcing myself to stand still, to let the familiarity of my surroundings sink in. I was fine. I was inside. I was alone. Then I saw it. A single, wet footprint on the hardwood floor. It wasn't mine. My breath hitched, the sound barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator and the faint creak of the building settling. The footprint was too large, the shape wrong, the toes splayed out unnaturally as if whoever, or whatever, left it had stumbled in, dragging damp flesh across the wood. I swallowed hard, my mind scrambling for an explanation that didn't immediately tip me into blind panic. Maybe I had stepped in something outside and tracked it in without realizing. Maybe it was an old mark that had been there all along, unnoticed until now. Or maybe, no, there was no rational way to explain it. My shoes were dry, my socks clean, and I had locked the door behind me. The air in the apartment felt heavier now, thick and stagnant, pressing against my skin like damp fabric. Every shadow in the dimly lit room seemed stretched and unnatural, reaching just a little too far, pooling in places they had no right to be. I forced my feet to move, stepping closer, my pulse pounding in my ears. The footprint glistened in the light, the moisture still fresh, not yet evaporated, and a sickening thought slithered into my mind. Whoever had left it hadn't been here long. A sharp crack echoed from the hallway. I whipped around, my breath catching in my throat, every muscle in my body tensing as I stared at the narrow corridor leading to my bedroom. The door was ajar, just a sliver, a black line against the dull glow of the nightstand lamp. I was sure I had left it closed. Positive. But now it gaped slightly, the kind of opening that felt deliberate, an invitation or a warning, I couldn't tell which. I stepped forward slowly, my bare feet silent against the floor, heart hammering so hard I thought it might shake my ribs apart. The air smelled different now, subtly wrong, something musty, metallic, like old water pooling in a forgotten place. I reached the doorway, forcing myself to peek inside, every instinct in my body screaming at me to run, but I had to look. Nothing. The bed was undisturbed, the sheets slightly rumpled from where I had left them that morning, the dresser untouched, the curtains drawn just as I had left them. But something still felt off, an unseen weight pressing down on the space, as if the very air carried the memory of something that had been here only moments before. I stepped inside, scanning the room, the silence stretching, taut and unnatural, waiting to snap. Then I heard it. A breath. Not mine. It was ragged, shallow, a wet whisper of sound coming from behind me. Cold dread flooded my veins, locking me in place, my muscles seizing with a terror so sharp it was almost electric. I didn't want to turn around. I couldn't. But I had no choice. My body moved against my will, slow and mechanical, like a marionette yanked on invisible strings. There, in the mirror. A reflection that wasn't mine. I saw myself standing there, my own wide eyes staring back, but my mouth, twisted into something else, lips curling into a grin I wasn't making, teeth bared too wide, too sharp. And the eyes. Hollow. Black pits where my own should have been. Then the reflection lifted a hand, my hand, but I hadn't moved. And it pointed at me. The lights flickered, the room shuddered, and everything went dark. The darkness wasn't just the absence of light. It was thick, almost tangible, as if I reached out, my fingers would sink into it like warm, sticky air. I couldn't move. Not because something physically held me back, my body simply refused to obey. My heart pounded somewhere in my throat, echoing dully in my ears, and it felt like if I made even the slightest motion, something would notice. I don't know how long I stood there, seconds, minutes, an eternity. In the darkness, there was no time, no space. Only me. In it, mirroring me. And then something changed. The silence was no longer true silence. It crackled, like faint radio interference breaking through static, a barely audible fizzing that grew louder, clearer, burrowing into my eardrums. And then, the voice. The same one that had called me before. My voice. But broken, old, worn down, like someone who had screamed too long, until their throat had turned to raw meat. Now it's too late. And from the darkness, slowly, almost leisurely, something emerged. I couldn't see its face, it had none. Just a faceless shadow, wrapped in something that resembled a cloak or a shroud, shifting as if unseen winds rippled through it. It didn't walk, didn't step forward, it closed in, and in that moment, I felt that this was not just some entity. This was me. But not me. A version of me that wasn't supposed to exist. A version of me that had stepped out of its time. A version of me that had made a mistake. And that mistake had come to collect. I don't remember exactly how I fell when it reached for me. I don't remember how I desperately tried to grasp onto reality, onto any thought that could explain this as just a dream. Just my brain playing tricks on me, overheating from stress. But when it touched me, I felt cold. Not the kind of cold that comes with a winter night, but the kind that creeps in when a person is on the verge of death, when blood stops flowing, when the last impulses fade. And then, light. Blinding, searing, like a blow to the head. I opened my eyes. And I was lying in my room, the damp trace of that cursed footprint spreading beside me, evaporating into the air as if it had never existed. The phone rang. I picked up without thinking, without even realizing what I was doing. Now it's too late. My voice. But from somewhere deep. From a place I never wanted to look into again. And I understood. Tomorrow, it would all start again.